Let's get back on the build. So we got all these pieces to sand down. I got one boot done, sanded, primed, all that other good stuff. Let me know in the comments below. Are you building something? And if you are, let me know what you're building. Or you just like these type of videos where people are building stuff and you think they're cool. Either way, tell me in the comments. Unfortunately, in this video, there's going to be a lot of cleanup. I'm starting with the boot, and you can see I have my little nail dust collector underneath me. Get one of those if you're in a tight spot. They really do help with the dust. I'm starting out with my Dspiae pen sander. This thing is really, really good for doing soft sanding. You're going to see me use a lot of different tools. So first off, I'm just doing a basic getting the nubs down, and then I'm going to move over to 1000 grit sandpaper, and that's to get everything smooth. Now that I have her toe cleaned up, we got to work on the top of the boot, the rim, and also on the inside, these nubs here. It's imperative that you clean up those nubs. Very, very important. Because if you leave those things there on both sides, you're not going to get a good fit. Even look inside the key and on top of the key that's going inside the hole, you're going to find nubs on there from supports. Clean them up. Make sure you do. I know it's a tedious task, but it's highly important you do. It'll make fitting parts together a lot easier. I have the top cleaned up on this, but I'm going to show you two parts that are partially cleaned and one that's not cleaned. Over here, I still have the lumps. Over here, I haven't cleaned it up. So once I put these two parts together, you're going to see there's a wobble in it because of the nubs being there, so it doesn't fit down all the way perfectly. Now back onto her lovely boot. I have that all cleaned up, that printed out smooth. These things fit like a glove perfectly in there, no gap or anything like that. And the last thing up on the boot I have to do is fill in the hole, and we're going to do that with some Bondo. And yep, let's fill in this hole. I just put some Bondo on the Q-tip and I mushed a whole bunch in the hole. I let that dry for a while. It only takes about, I'd say about a half an hour to dry. And then once that's dry, of course I go into sanding. I sand it all down and then I'll fill it up again because the Bondo does shrink. Yup, off to the Mr. G tool over here. We're going to use this on the bottom. I'm actually going to use the Dspiae too because the head of this doesn't reach in there that well. I do like my Mr. G tool a little bit better than the Dspiae though. So I'm just getting off that excess Bondo that we have on the bottom, and then I'm going to fill it up again. And yes, my mother-in-law gave me some cool makeup brushes. If you don't have one of these, this fan brush works great for dusting off the parts. And resin dust does get on top of the nail dust collector on that grating there. So just take that fan thing while the fan is on, sweep it in, and it'll suck it right in. And back for the second layer of Bondo, I messed up. Once I primed it, I saw that I should have put a third layer, but I didn't because it's going to be facing the back anyhow. So there will be goof ups on my models. Yes, onto another Mr. G tool. This is the Pro Polisher 3. This takes things down super easy. Going to make these big parts go quicker, but be careful with this. It does take things down quickly. You're going to see me in a little while use this across the rim of the thigh here, but I'm very, very lightly touching it because of how fast it takes things down, so be very careful. On this thigh, the top of the stocking or whatever it is, there were a few cracks. I don't remember if I recorded for this, but if you go check out the shorts, I put some stuff in there that isn't in the long form video. The nice thing about the Mr. G Tool Polisher 3, it's got multiple heads, so does the Dspiae. This way I could change it over. On this one, I'm putting in a flatter head. This way I could get inside. But still, with this, I'm still going to have a little trouble and I'm going to have to switch over to other tools. And after all that sanding and everything came out pretty darn good. The only thing is we lost a little detail around the edge of the thigh, and that's because there were some supports there and we had to sand them down. I would rather lose that little bit that you're really not going to notice, and you can see the fit is really, really tight on here. And just a few more spots to clean up on the armor where there was some sport marks. And that's pretty much it for this thigh. Back to the final cleanup on this boot. Everything's good to go. The next thing I'm going to do is boom, put it in primer, and we have another boot done. So that's 2 boots, and we could start painting those soon. And now onto that second thigh, back to sanding, getting rid of all the support marks because we want a really good fit. And it's funny how people say that 3D printing is just magic. It flows together with no problem at all. Obviously, they haven't built a 3D model and had to take care of support marks and pinholes and all that other good stuff, especially layer lines. But I'm doing the same thing here. We're just going to run through some more cleanup and we'll move on to some more parts. Now, sometimes it's frustrating and you can't get it to everything you want to, so this is where I bring out the big boy. This is my Dremel, and this is the diamond point bit. This thing is awesome. It does leave some gouge marks, but I'm not worried about that in here. What I'm doing is taking down nubs I can't get to, and also over here, I'm getting around that rim where the top was a little bit over where it shouldn't have been, and taking care of that, and it takes it down nice and neat. Nobody's gonna see this. It's gonna be on the inside, either crazy glued or 5-minute epoxy or whatever else I'm gonna use to keep this thing together. Now, I got all the support nubs out of here, off the top, in the middle, off the key, everything, but I'm still having a problem fitting this to that part. There was a bit of a layer line over here, like it was a misprint, so it's not fitting in tight as possible that it could. I'm pushing on this, and this is the one that I actually crack because of that line, and I end up having to fix that thigh. Finally, we got another piece in primer, and we're moving on. Leg by leg, bit by bit, we'll get there. And this part is an absolute waste of time. I'm not even gonna show you all of me cleaning up her torso and her hips. It ended up that the two parts didn't mate up, and there was a huge gap. I couldn't even fill them with putty because I would have had to slope it up and make it look right like the print. So these went in the garbage, and I printed up 2 new pieces using Abe 3D supports, and they came out well. You'll see that in another video. And here she is. I tried to do some major surgery on her to make her fit, just it wasn't happening. So let's get off of the sanding for now and get over to some lighting. Onto the red ring. What I'm gonna use is Rust-Oleum's frosted glass. It's gonna fog it up. It's gonna give it that hazy look, which is nice. But if you do use this stuff stinks to high heaven, so make sure you're in a well-ventilated room. Yeah, I was sucking wind when I sprayed this stuff in the garage. Okay, I'm gonna have to bring wires down through this hole because we're gonna get that lightsaber through her body, through this hole, and into the bottom of the base. What I'm gonna do is I'm going to take my needle file, I'm going to mark a spot right here, and of course I'm going to use my razor saw as a hammer to get it down into there, mark a spot, then I'm going to use my Dremel, and we're just going to drill that hole, open it up. This way we could get the wires into the open base. Just a little more cleanup. I do have to clean up the supports that were on the lightsaber itself. I'm using the Mr. G tool. I don't care that it's getting scuffed up because I'm going to fog it up anyhow because I want to diffuse any of the light that's going to be in there. So finally, I'm using Ron Orr's turntable, like the Tamiya turntable. The other one was being used, so I had to use this one. I was a little disappointed because I didn't want to get paint on it. I did get some clear coat on it, so that doesn't look bad. But finally doing it, throwing the top on here, and we're going to use Tamiya X1 black paint, and we're going to paint this guy all up. I did put this guy on the vortex mixer, but I did want to stir it up some more just to make sure that none of the clumpiness is on the bottom that happens on Tamiya paint sometimes. The next thing I'm going to do is wipe the rim off because otherwise those tops get stuck. So I'm just taking my little tin here. I'm not using cups anymore. These I'm going to use for mixing other things. I'm going to grab my pipettes, and I'm going to grab some paint, and I'm going to do 30 drops of Tamiya paint, and then I'm going to do 30 drops of the Tamiya thinner. Mix them all up and toss them in the airbrush. And now let's get to the fun of spraying this down with the airbrush. The thing is, when I use the small airbrush on a big surface like this, at the end you're gonna see lines across it, and I am never good enough to get rid of those lines with this small airbrush. It just looks bad to me. So when I do something like this again, I'm gonna get out my HVLP. That's high volume, low pressure, and then I'll get a nice even coat. With this paint job, I did notice a few imperfections, and I'll show you those in a minute. Even with the glare, you can see those lines going straight across, up and down. I just couldn't get a flat, nice, even coat just because of how big it was and how small diameter it is on the smaller airbrushes, and I really hate this. But we get lucky with the clear coat. Now that it's all dry, we're gonna clear coat it. I'm gonna use a gloss, Mr. Super Clear Gloss. I love this stuff. It is really nice and shiny, as you can see here, and it actually took away all those lines. You could see all the little imperfections that I didn't get with Bondo. I really didn't take my time, and you can also see the layer lines from where the print was. I should have really taken that down, but it's gonna be on my shelf. It's not for a customer or anything like that, so it's good enough for me. If this was for somebody else, then we'd have a different story. Still a little work to do on the red here. It's got a little shine, so I have to use the frosted glass on here and make it nice and foggy to diffuse the light. Finally, the nudes from Adafruit showed up. These are little squiggly little LED lights that we're going to use for the lightsaber. I ordered extra one of these because we're going to do a little experiment right now. We're going to cut back this sheathing and see what is underneath here, because I heard you can cut them and you can resolder them. So I'm just going to take my X-Acto knife and I'm going to start cutting back this sheathing. You can actually see where the metal ends. We're going to cut it back, slice it off very, very carefully because I don't want to break anything, and see what we got running up underneath here. This is the positive end of the nude, but you can see there's two leads, a left and a right, a positive and negative, that go right up and down the whole nude. So we're going to take this piece off and do a little more experimenting. I was able to use magnet wire, get it all soldered up and lit up. Now I'm going to cut the other end off and see what happens, if it cuts out or not. Nope. There we go. You can cut the other end off and it's good. But are you noticing what is happening with this LED light? If so, let me know in the comments below. Now that I'm putting it up into the lightsaber, you might be able to tell what I'm talking about a few seconds ago with the light. If you haven't noticed, the end that I cut stays brighter and it gets dimmer and dimmer as it goes up towards the end that wasn't cut. I don't know the exact science behind it. My buddy Spence told me, and he'll probably tell you in the comments below. Now this is the 12-volt nude. I have it folded over, two ends squished up into the lightsaber. You can see how bright this is, but they get really warm. So I'm gonna have to do a 24-hour test on this and see if it does anything to the resin. Now to start working on the LED tape, I'm gonna cut this 12-volt adapter off the end because I can't use that. And then we're gonna start measuring out tape for the inside of the base. I just put a towel down to protect the gloss coat on the base because I messed it up enough already. I'm just dropping in the LED strip to see where I want it, and then we're just going to start cutting strips of that. This way we can wire it up and get it in the base. The LED tape I bought has a protective waterproof coating on it. All I'm doing is slicing through until I get to the bottom, and then I'm going to carefully cut underneath that gel. This way I can pull it off and I can expose those pads at the tip so we can solder those up. Now, once I scored the back, I went underneath the front, like I said, and you can see me flipping it up here. That's the protective coating. This way I could get to those two pads, the positive and negative leads. Now that I have the pads exposed, I just put some flux on the tip of the Q-tip and I'm putting that on the ends of the pad so it makes it easier to put the solder on there. Now here, I'm gonna make a huge mistake. And no, not pre-tinning. Pre-tinning is important. We have to pre-tin these wires so it makes it easier for soldering. The huge mistake I made is I love my Cat 5 wire and that's what I'm using here. And I didn't realize the bend on it was gonna be too big and too tight. So I'm gonna do this, I'm gonna show you this, and then I'm gonna change the wire. And I'm still doing my goof up right here. I have both things pre-tinned. I got my solder on there. I'm just gonna hit it so it warms it up, put the tiny piece on there, and boom, we have our piece on, and then I gotta do the other leg. And of course, after soldering, we have to test it and make sure that our solder is good, and boom, we have our red lights. Good to go on this, but not good to go in the base. Lucky for me, the glue on the back of this tape really is horrible and didn't stick that well. This is where I'm finding out that, well, Kenny, you messed up. You put on that Cat 5 and it's just too thick. I'm gonna get it all the way around and then I'm gonna get it up that slot, and that's where I'm gonna see the bend is bad. And if I use that bend, eventually my solder points would break and the lights would go out. And here's where I got smart. I have the magnet wire on here. I got it all soldered up again. A much better fit, and they're more flexible and easier to get up that slot. I should have remembered this from watching Boyd. Like I said before, the tape glue is horrible, so what I did was I used DAP Rapid Fuse on the back of it and I pushed it around really slowly. It wanted to bubble. I did use Kicker on there to dry it up real quick, and now it's on there nice and tight. So what we have to do now is put 2 more layers. And this is where I get excited seeing the test lighting. It's looking good. There's 2 layers in there. There's going to be a lot of hot spots just because of how it is. It didn't line up well behind the post, so things happen. We'll take care of that. And I can squeeze 1 more layer of LED lights in here. All 3 bands are in there and it's nice and bright. It looks a little dimmer on camera, but that is really good looking in person. The red ring is nice and diffused using that frosted glass paint from Rust-Oleum, but that diffusion is definitely not going to be enough to take care of any of the hot spots. So I just got to squeeze these wires through here and we are going to pop this little red ring in there. And like I said about Abe 3D, their parts fit really well, especially when I did my supports myself and did them right. There was no problem fitting the parts. I did some wrong, messed up some parts, so I just used Abe's stuff. And now here you go. I'm just putting the ring on here and I'm going to push it down and it's going to slide right in there with no problem, no scratching or anything. You can absolutely see the hot spots here. I knew that was going to happen. It's no big deal. We have other ways to diffuse these lights and make sure that none of that shows up. And if some do show up, they'll be minimal. I did get a little glue on there. I think I got to clean that up, but everything's looking good. Got to get my fingerprints off here and let's get this more diffused. So how I'm going to diffuse this more, what I have in my hand is polyfill fiber, and this will diffuse lights really well. You could do it on your starships for your engines and stuff like that. I'm using it in between the red ring and the lights. It's a little difficult to push it in here. I'm using my sculpting tools, but I'll slowly go around getting enough of this polyfill in there where it's going to diffuse the light and we still have plenty of brightness coming through. I'm going to have to go back afterwards and find some of the spots that I missed or I put too little of the polyfill in there, and we will be able to get all the lights diffused and it'll look really good. And there she is, all lit up. I think it looks great. A few hot spots to take care of because it was too thin. And that's it for this one, guys. I'll see you in the next one.